Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy Eggen. In today's video, I have two cards that I'm going to share with you. My original idea is this first card here where I added color to my die cut pieces using the lovely layer rose using Distress spray stains. Now the second idea came to me as I was getting ready to make this video, and this is really great for really using up our scraps. I am going to be using my negative piece that I die cut my pieces from to create my own stencil. So kind of a twofer you're getting out of this one. The first thing I want to do is show you the die set that I'm using today, and it is this lovely Layers Rose die set. I went ahead and die cut all of my pieces off screen using 80-pound white cardstock. I like to die cut everything and then kind of line them up where they're supposed to be so I have an idea of the order. So these leaves are going to layer on top of each other. That back leaf is going to be on its own. And then I did the same thing for the rose. I die cut the pieces and I laid them all out, layered them together so I knew exactly how it was going to fit. Now, here is where this idea hit me. Now, normally when I die cut something, I throw the negative pieces in the trash and I walked away. I came back and I looked and I was like, wait a minute, I can use this as a stencil. So I pulled them back out of my garbage and I'm going to show you later on how I use those. We are going to start with my original idea, which was spraying these to add color to them using Distress spray stains. This first color is Cracked Pistachio that I'm adding to the leaves. I have all the pieces in here for the leaves, and then I'm bringing in Evergreen Bough, which was way darker than I thought it was, but I'm rolling with it. I'm going to keep going. I always kind of wipe my nozzles off with a baby wipe to make sure they don't get clogged. Now I'm going to bring in the Distress Mica Stain in Tarnished Brass just to add a little bit of interest to those. Now also notice I am doing kind of a sweeping motion on those leaves. Now for the flowers, this first layer is Spun Sugar. And I always do kind of spray off on the side a little bit. I'm doing all of this in just a box I got some products in. Now my second color I'm bringing in is Kitsch Flamingo, and I'm kind of coming in from the sides. I didn't want to spray across. I didn't want the whole thing to be covered. I just kind of wanted some splatter marks to it. Now this one I also came in with the Tarnished Brass, which showed up way more on the light colors than I had expected, but I think it still came out really neat and almost kind of vintagey. Now I'm just drying that off with my heat tool, and I'm going to go ahead and start layering these pieces together. So the first thing I'm doing is, just like I did in the beginning, I'm layering up the pieces the way they should fit, taking them off in that order so I know exactly how to glue them down. And then I'm just using my Honeybee Stamps liquid glue and my tweezers to attach all of those pieces. If you really wanted to add dimension to this, you could add foam squares or really thin foam squares in between each layer, but I'm just gluing them directly on top of one another, and it honestly isn't that bad for dimension as far as mailing. Might take maybe a little bit of extra postage, but I don't think it's really much more than when we layer our die cuts. Now I'm doing the same thing with the leaves. Now with the leaves, my spray was a little dark and I did lose a little bit of the embossed detail that is in there. You could add that back in with maybe a white or black gel pen or even some colored pencils if you wanted. Here's a look at my piece all finished. I really love how this came out, and especially with that tarnished brass. I really surprised myself how much I liked that on the flower. Now I'm going to work on my second idea, which is using my negative space there as a stencil. So what I did is I'm bringing out this waffle flower stencil mat that I have, and I placed my first leaf image there, my die cut area, onto the cardstock about where I want it to go. I have a piece of white cardstock there that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You can see I added a bunch of Post-it tape around it to kind of protect the rest of the card and also those open areas from my open die cut areas. And I'm starting off by ink blending Twisted Citron. Now I'm just going to peel off that Post-it tape. You could use Post-it notes, whatever you happen to have on hand. I really like this large 2-inch Post-it tape because it does cover so much space. So once again, I kind of shifted my cardstock over and I layered up that first leaf. Once again, kind of ink blending. I have mowed lawn, and then I came in with a little bit of pine needles to try and add a little bit of dimension to that. And then I have one more leaf here that I'm going to do the same thing. I added a little bit of that Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink and then just a smidge of the pine needles. And then there's just one more piece towards the very top of the stem that I'm going to do that same thing on. Now you can see I am reusing all of my Post-it pieces. So for the greens, I'm reusing them. I'll get some new pieces when I do the flower. And then here's the big reveal. Now I do have some open space there, but I'm okay with it because I figured that's where my sentiment can kind of go over and hide it. Now I moved on to the flower. Now this one I did kind of mess up a little bit. I didn't pick the right layers, I don't think, but it still all worked out. If I were to go back, I would probably use my die cut pieces to figure out which one's the bottom layer and so forth and number them. But like I said, this was kind of an afterthought. I didn't really think of that at first. And I am using Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink. I am starting with the lightest color on the very bottom so that I can layer colors on top. Typically, if you have your die cut layered rows, you would have the darkest piece in the back. But for ink blending purposes, I am starting with the very lightest color towards the back. So I moved my cardstock, I kind of masked off my areas there, and I ink blended on some picked raspberry. Now here is where I kind of fidgeted a little bit and realized I goofed up a little, but it's still going to work out, and I think it still turned out really super cool. So I am still using picked raspberry. I am just adding more color. So you don't have to have a ton of colors to do this. Just keep adding color on top of each one, and that is going to darken it just a little bit. This last piece, I brought in candied apple, just kind of change that up a little bit. I didn't know how much darker I could get with that picked raspberry. So after I peel all of that off, here is that card front, which I think turned out just really cool. I'm going to use the same kind of card design for each one of these cards. I'm going to make two separate cards. For this, I'm using the Buzzword stamp set and honey cut. So I lined that up on the front of the card so I know exactly where my small sentiment is going to be. And I used the Misty ruler to make sure that that was straight. I am stamping this sentiment in the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink because I know that's going to stamp really well on top of oxides. Now for my die cut flower card, I decided to go really drastic here, have a lot of contrast, and I'm using black cardstock, but because it's black, I need to heat emboss, so I prepped the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm stamping this in white pigment ink. Then I'm going to sprinkle on some white embossing powder, tap off any of that excess, and then I will melt that embossing powder with my heat tool. One of the reasons I am doing all of this first is because I want to add splatters to my background, but I need to have the sentiments there first because otherwise it's kind of hard to either stamp or heat emboss on top of splatters. So after I had that heat embossed and my other sentiment is stamped on, I'm actually protecting it with just a little skinny strip of Post-it tape. Then I'm taking some starry colors. I added a couple drops of water, added that mixture to an acrylic block, and then just flicking on these gold splatters all over the back of my cardstock. And I'm going to do the same thing for the stencil background that I have. I'm going to protect my sentiment so I don't get splatters on it, and I'm going to just splatter that entire background with the gold splatters. To finish off this sentiment for the front of both cards, I die cut the word you, and I'm just using the scripty one out of the set, not the shadow layer. I die cut it 4 times from white cardstock and twice from gold. So for each card front, it's going to have the gold in the front and then 2 layers of white behind that. Then I can just add these to the front of each card with my tweezers and liquid glue. My stencil background was really easy because that whole background is 1 layer. The only dimension I have is the word you. Now for my other card, which is the black cardstock, this one, of course, I had to be a little bit more mindful. So I'm kind of lining up where this die cut piece is going to go. I'm going to add it to the card front with my liquid glue. And like I said, there really isn't too much dimension to this. I thought there would be more, honestly, but I think you get more dimension out of it if you add foam squares between your layers. So now I can go ahead and add my U on top. I just have that little tail from the U kind of overlapping the leaf, but that wasn't too bad. I like to create my cards lately as side folding cards. So I have a card base here that is going to be an A2 size card, and I hold my card closed with a little bit of washi tape or Post-it tape. I tuck it into the corner of my Misty, and then I added tape runner behind my card front panel, and I tuck that into the corner of the Misty. So this really helps me line up my card front panels with my card base. Then that way, if there's any white sticking out on the top or the side, I can just easily trim that off with my paper trimmer. All right, so here's a look at both of the cards that I completed today. I'm really happy with how these came out, and I love this idea of using your negative space to create kind of a stenciled background. So really, you're getting the most out of this die. I really hope you found this inspirational. I will have all of the supplies used in the video listed down below in the description. Thanks so much for stopping by.